It's been a long road getting from there to here. It's been a long time.
Well, anyway, my name is Robert Bonchune. I'm VFX supervisor, and I was a VFX supervisor on Star Trek, Voyager, a little bit of Deep Space Nine, and all of Enterprise, as well as Battlestar Galactica and other shows.
You also worked on the director's cut of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, didn't you, back in
Correct.
2001?
Well, for that project, it was more like a team. There was the supervisor really was like the guys who brought it in, which was Darren Doctorman and David Fine. They were the producers that I guess worked it out with Robert Wise to finish the film. And I think it was I don't want to speak for them, but my memory is, talking to Darren, that it was his pet, it was a pet project of theirs. They want to see it done. And Darren, they knew Mojo. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Adam Leibowitz. Mojo. He was like the other supervisor on Star Trek, and they knew each other. So he said, "I'll bring it to Foundation Imaging," because he knew somebody there. And so he kind of like collected like a little group of, well, the animators that could do it and the animators that already, the best of, I guess. But for that project, they didn't want, they wanted people that were veterans of doing Star Trek, and that had a love for it as well. And obviously that'd be people on the Star Trek team. So
how did you first become involved with Star Trek?
How or what?
How?
I didn't go to Los Angeles to be involved with Star Trek. I mean, I just went there to see because I was a hobbyist, a hobby model builder. And I said, well, for some reason, I don't really know, because I always usually play it safe. At least back then, I wasn't a very, I didn't take a lot of risks. I'm not that kind of person. Like, just to move out of the city and leave my friends would have been traumatic to me or whatever. Like but anyway, for some reason, one day it's just like something snapped in my head, and I just was like, I'm gonna go there and try. And I found out that there's these visas that would allow me to go there on my university degree. If I could get the employer to say that I was going to be employed with my physics degree, because I didn't go, all my schooling was science. It wasn't, had nothing to do with arts or anything like that.
Mm.
It was always on my own. But I knew I was pretty good at building models. So I was like, well, I could do models in miniatures. So I just decided to go down. So I went down there and I found a job to keep me there in the country in terms of a temporary visa. But while I was doing that job, I went to I'd find the addresses of all the different model shops all over the city, miniature shops. So I would just go to them and ask, can I have a job? What's it going to take? And I had time, and I'd give myself about 3-4 months. I had 3-4 months worth of money. And when I found the job, it helped a little more. I could pad it out.
Mm.
But at some point, I guess I would have given up. But I just happened to meet the right people and become friends with the right people that were working at this one shop called Wonderworks. And one day they hired me. So even though I was totally novice and scared shitless, they're a really great group of people to work with. Anyway, it was a great bunch of guys, and I had a lot of fun. And so at first I started working on I think the first thing I worked on was a 747. It was a huge 747 for a commercial for Cathay Pacific. And it was the launch of their new livery, their new colors at the time. So they wanted to put, I guess, an airplane in their commercial, in their commercial with all the colors, because I guess they hadn't painted a real 747-400 yet. I mean, we had real motors in the engines, and everything worked. So that was the first thing I worked on. But I didn't know, but the owner of Wonderworks, Rick Price, had actually had connections with Star Trek, because he had done some designs. Because the first model of the Phase 2 Enterprise was done by his shop. Was done by Brick Price Works at the time. Then the company name changed to Wonderworks, and that's how I knew them. But back in the late 70s, it was called Brick Price's something, Brick Price Works or anything. Brick Price was his name. So he had tenuous connections to Star Trek already.
Mhm.
And they came to our shop, or the Wonderworks shop, Star Trek. I guess they came there one day to ask him to do the Kazon ships for the premiere Voyager. He needed the practicals for that. So our shop got the job for it. And so that's essentially how that connection started, because I didn't really work on the models because I was kind of too junior. They weren't going to give me like, anyway, I would have been too scared to do. I mean, there's guys that way more knew what they were doing. I mean, to put all the lighting in it and everything. But when it came to bringing the models, to bringing like the two Kazon ships to Image G, to bring them to the motion control stage, they let me go because they knew I was a big Star Trek fan. And they were like, let's let Rob will take it up there. You'll have a ball. He'll love every second of it. Let's let him go. It'll make his millennium. So I got to take them up there, and that's kind of like where at least it sort of started. Like, so when I went up there and I delivered them, and Dan Curry happened to be there, and again, I only know these people by name, by books that I've read living back here in Montreal.
Sure.
It's weird. You're like, oh my God, this is Dan Curry. It's like, and he comes in, and he goes, oh no, this is not gonna do. And I'm just like, oh fuck. It's like he looks at them and he goes, no. He goes, this is not weathered enough that we cannot film these. And I'm the representative. I'm junior at this place, and I'm like the rep, and now I'm the rep. And I'm like, well, I was kind of like, what do you mean? He goes, let me show you. And he just puts it on a stand. He takes the model, puts it on a stand, and then like kicks on the lights that they're going to use to film it.
Yeah.
And he goes, as you can see, the weathering is nowhere near enough, because as soon as he kicked the lights on, it's like what looked like decent weathering just gone. Like it just turned to one color, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's going to need way more dirt.
Yeah.
So he says, well, you're here and you're representing them, so you're going to help me do it, And I was like, okay. So we went into like there was a imageries, they had the big sort of like motion control stage, but they also had like, other rooms, and they had like a staging room where they work, if a model broke, a workshop, they had all the tools and everything, paints, everything that they need to be able to fix things on the fly, So we went into that room, and then, we just put the two Kazon ships on two different tables on a stand, and he took one side and I took the other, and he just goes, copy what I do on your side. So for like the next 5 hours was just me and Dan Curry shooting the shit, and me just weathering one side and him doing the other side of the ships to get them ready. So that was like my first like connection, I didn't say very much for the first like hour or two. I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to screw it up,
No, definitely.
I'm the rep, like not the rep, but I am. Even though I'm the junior guy, I'm the guy that's there. So it reflects on.
Yeah.
So I was very careful. There was no gushing. I just treated it like a job, like any other, you know what I mean? No matter how much I wanted to go, hey, I want to ask you, I was just like, just follow his lead. Say as little as possible. The less you say, the less you can get in trouble. The less you're going to say something stupid. Or that was the first encounter. But then I went back to Wonderworks and Star Trek, that was it for that contract. But I made friends with somebody. Well, I made friends with a lot of people at the shop, but there was one guy in particular. He had quit to go work on Sequest to do playback, motion graphics for the screens on the Sequest. And so I was still, even though he had left, I was still friends with him. And one day, I guess they only had like two people to do playback, to do motion graphics for Sequest, as opposed to the 3D team, which was larger. But they only really needed two. And one of the guys got promoted to the 3D department. So they needed somebody else to come in, and they needed another 2D guy. But I'm not a computer guy. It's not my thing. I watched my friend Carl do it at his place. Like, I saw what he was doing. But he goes, look, Rob, he goes, we don't need anybody for 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks to learn how to do it. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to work with computers. I was like, I like the models, I like building and painting stuff. And he's like, come on, 2 weeks. It's a great opportunity. and then he tells me the salary, and it was like 3 times what I was making. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess he goes, you're working at ambulance imaging, come on. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I'm like, it's not my thing, I mean, I can design stuff. So it was like I learned as much as I could of the program that they were using at the time. And so I ended up getting that, well, obviously nepotism. I mean, friends. So, I did
Not
get
what
the
you know,
job.
too,
Yeah, it's and I learned on the fly, but I mean, I was, I wouldn't have been able to keep doing it if I wasn't any good at it, because then he left and then I was in charge of the department. Which is really weird because it's like that all happened within like 4 months, 4 months or something like that. Like to come in to be like, okay, I'm the junior, then all of a sudden 2 months later, now I'm the leader of that department of 2 people. And then I got to know the rest of the guys in the 3D department. And here's where the next connection with Star Trek starts, because Ambulance Imaging, they did the CG Voyager. They took, I think, from Santa Barbara Studios, they took that mesh and transferred it over to the lightweight program that Ambulance Imaging was using to do all the West 3D shots. And they were doing miscellaneous shots, even though they were still using models on Voyager. At this point, they were starting to, see if CG could replace, things. They were doing tests, even though they're still filming models, they were slowly like, making headway. And then again, the Foundation Imaging, the owner, Ron Thornton, had a relationship with one of the VFX supervisors on Star Trek, on Voyager. So he liked using Foundation Imaging, even though the other guy liked using this other place. And again, just because I was there and it's a small team, I started doing Star Trek shots. I started doing Voyager shots. As again, as a junior, just learning, moving my way up, and I started building, and then I got to build my first ship for them, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's just and that's it, from then on, and it was like Star Trek all the time, almost. For quite a long time. And the funny thing is that not once, I mean, in virtually the whole time I was there, not once did I ever say to myself, I'm going to find a way to work on Star Trek. Never entered my mind. I was happy to just get a job. So I found it funny that with really no effort on my own part to be part of Star Trek, I became part of Star Trek.
For those that aren't as familiar with film or TV production, could you give a brief description of what a visual effects supervisor does?
If you get to be a supervisor, essentially you're just the person responsible for what happens with the team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody on the team, we're all pretty much the same level of talent, but someone has to be the go-between between the studio and, between like Paramount and you, the vendor, this Foundation.
Yeah.
And I just got along really well with one of the VFX supervisors from Paramount. That like their VFX supervisor title is like everything within that episode. Whereas me, it's like the CG VFX supervisor is like specifically all the computer generated effects. So so there's a guy I answer to. Well, me and him got along pretty well, so that's one reason why I became the supervisor, because there certainly were other people that were just as talented, but it really kind of comes down to just that kind of like, is it going to work or not, and essentially, so you're overseeing usually the teams, I'd say per episode, 5 to 7 animators per episode. Now, some episodes are heavy, some are light, so you trade off. Like, in other words, there was 2 teams, like, because there's an episode every week.
Yeah.
There are 2 teams, so we do every other, like, each team does like the the odd shows, and another team does
that
the
makes sense.
shows. So there's 2 supervisors from Paramount, and one worked with Mojo, the other guy, the other supervisor, and one worked with me. So, but we all shared the same group of people, and it was just, we just shifted people around, like, depending, if that person's show was heavy, they'd get more people. If that show was light, less people. And that's kind of how it was. And essentially, you're just making sure that your guys are doing what they're supposed to be doing, being consistent, that all, like, one guy can't be lighting one way and the other guy lighting another way when the
Yeah,
shots are back to back. You can't have, so you're, so making sure continuity, making sure that the models are built to the level that they should be, that, that the shots look as best as they can. What I liked about the guys that I worked with anyway, with, or the company even, but is that everyone was never like, everyone wanted to always do better.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a good supervisor, you hire people that are better than you because you should, you know what I mean? In other words, if you really want to succeed, that's what you do. Like you can't have that ego, because you're gonna end up doing everything yourself, which is not going to be productive. You want people, I call them I like fire and forget. And I don't mean fire like you're fired, but I'm thinking military, because I'm a big military buff. Like the kind of missile where you just click the button, it goes off, and you don't have to pay attention to that missile anymore because it's going to do its job. It's got its own seeker on it. You can concentrate on something else.
Sure.
I always made sure that the guys on my team, I would always push to have the guys that I knew were those kind of guys. In other words, I give them the assignment. I know that if I'm not watching them all the time, that they're gonna exceed my equal or exceed my expectations, and not just leave at 5 o'clock because they just felt like it or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, the one thing that was really cool about Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica is that most animators did all of a shot. Like, it wasn't like I didn't give somebody like, oh, you're going to do the lighting on this shot, and this guy's going to do the whatever on this shot, and he's going to do the no. It's like, if I give a shot number to an animator, they do the whole shot. It's their shot. So when it shows up on the show, they can say, that's my shot. Well, what part of it? No, the whole thing. The whole thing was theirs, and that was cool.
One of the things that I love about Star Trek Enterprise is the fact that it's set in the 22nd century, which meant that we got to sort of revisit familiar Star Trek elements, but like in a new way. For example, we got to see early versions of familiar ship designs. What was that like for you as a visual effects supervisor? Did that create a sense of like creative freedom, or?
On a personal note, I wasn't very thrilled with the idea of flipping the Akira over and calling it a 22nd century ship. As a Star Trek fan, especially as a more technical, like loving the blueprint since I was a little kid and having the whole universe make sense to me, that kind of didn't make sense to me. I wish Berman and Braga would have been a little more trusting of the art department and everybody else, and show primitive things as primitive things. But I think they felt, I don't have their job, so I'm sure they felt like if they strayed too far away from the formula of, encountering a race every week, people wouldn't watch, or who knows what they thought.
Yeah.
And what pressures they were under. But overall, there were a lot of things at least they did that were pretty cool that they did get in there. Like, they didn't have everything right away. Excuse me, the ship wasn't the fastest. It wasn't, it had a lot of primitive things on it. Even if it had some of the exterior parts were, to me, like, not retro, if you will, not like,
Yeah.
Because they come straight from the Akira is why I'm saying that, I'm just for the NX-01. I mean, but however, in terms of other designs that came through, like, I really like, that episodes came up that were good, like like the ones with the transport ships, like the ECS Fortunate, or the ECS Horizon. That was cool, like showing that merchant marine part of early space travel. I liked when they got in episodes like that, instead of like needing the alien of the week, because you're like, come on, they're not going that far. There should be a lot more. If you ask me, it should have been partly like The Expanse. There should have been a lot of shows where, like if I would have been the showrunner, I don't think we would have left the solar system for the first season. I would have had them just working on the warp drive, you know what I mean, and dealing with like Mars colony, which strangely enough they started to deal with in the 4th season.
Yeah.
But they finally started doing exactly what I thought it sort of should have been in the 4th season, but it was kind of too little too late at that point.
I think a lot of people felt that way. Yeah.
I never worked on a team, like, not just our team, I'm talking about the VFX team, I mean the art department, everybody everyone wanted it to be the best Star Trek it could be.
Yeah.
And everyone fought for that all the time. And if you didn't see something or something didn't make sense in the show, I tell you, it is not because of anybody below, like, you know, the top three, which would be like, you know, Berman Braga, and Peter Lortzen. Everybody below that wanted the geekiest, the best, the most amount of references, the most amount of continuity. Everybody fought for it, tooth and nail. And if you didn't see it, it's because it was rejected. It's not because it wasn't proposed.
Pretty much all of the things that like fans really had the biggest problems with Enterprise seem to have come down from like network executives and that sort of thing, who just clearly didn't get what the show was meant to be. I
personally think that the Enterprise should have been the Daedalus class, the Daedalus. It should have been one of those. They never would have went with that shape though, because it wasn't the Akira flipped over. You know, it's like, come on. That's what the NX-01 should have been. It should have been one of those ships. After my experience with Ron Moore on Battlestar Galactica, I could see that if Ron Moore would have been like the lead, let's say, on Enterprise, if he would have been the top dog, I think it would have been even better.
When you reached out, you offered to share the real story of why the series was called Enterprise. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess I can't get fired anymore, can I?
If you enjoyed this video, why not give it a like? Maybe share it with a friend or an enemy. Either way, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to see more content here on Channel 73.